We've been promised many things over the decades. Flying cars, 100 miles per gallon, cars that run on water, and most recently, 100% electric by 2025. Perhaps not surprising much of anyone, this also seems unlikely. At the time the promises were made, just a few years ago, the electric car market was starting to explode, and government regulations were being put into place to force the issue. For 3 years, electric car sales grew quickly, with much hype about improved range and superior performance. But now that 2025 is just around the corner, things are looking less promising, in spite of ever-increasing options in the segment. Sales growth has fallen off, remaining well below 10%. And many early adopters have traded in their electrics for traditional internal combustion engines. Why? Well, because as it turned out, much of the hype was just that, hype. Not to mention, government incentives are quickly disappearing, and resale values drop faster than a used engagement ring. Don't get me wrong, I'm actually a fan of electric cars. I've toyed with the idea of an electric drag car for some 30 years, and the instant torque has been a selling point even in non-performance models. But things like mile per gallon equivalent have been all but nonsense. A meaningless, formulaic number that over-exaggerates the cost of driving an electric car when compared to driving a so-called ICE car. That isn't to say an electric car isn't cheaper per mile to drive in terms of energy cost, because it is, but to say it's just like getting 120 miles per gallon or better is often misleading, particularly when it is related to predicted range that is often not achieved, sort of like basing mileage on maximum range while hypermiling. Perhaps an exaggeration of the issue, but you're still not likely to see real-world results in normal driving. In other words, it may be able to do it, but it's not realistic to expect it all the time. But this is really a trivial issue, as people don't buy electrics to save money. They cost far too much for that to be the case. The push has been for environmental reasons, something that has also been exaggerated. Sort of like when stores switched from paper to plastic bags to save the world. Why would we want to continue using recyclable, renewable, reusable, biodegradable resources when it can be replaced by something barely functional and even worse for the environment? But people look at electricity as a clean power source, presuming it comes from a source with no environmental impact, which is unlikely as even wind and hydroelectric have impacts on their environment. But the impact of making and disposing of batteries is the real issue, one that is glazed over by all the green hype. Although this isn't likely to have much impact on sales either, as it seems to be a market where image trumps reality, proven by the success of the Prius over all other hybrids, including other and arguably better ones, even those also made by Toyota. Although news stories of EV spontaneous combustion most likely hasn't helped sales, but those too have been exaggerated, as it typically only happens after a collision or exposure to an unfriendly environment, things such as salt water. But what certainly is having an impact on sales is cost and practicality, range, charging times, and infrastructure, still being issues of convenience, or the lack thereof. And although charging options are quickly evolving, universal charging stations are still not a thing, meaning electric cars are a little different than muscle cars, great in a straight line, but expensive to buy and insure, and not capable of fulfilling the needs of many buyers. So buyers are starting to question the idea, and manufacturers are starting to take losses, which means pushback, with companies ranging from Ford to Toyota pointing out the flaws in the current push. And 100% electric by 2025 has turned into 100% electric by 2035, with some companies suggesting the move to hydrogen fuel cells are the answer. Not water-powered and still electric, but it does produce water instead of exhaust. It still has a battery, but is more environmentally friendly than the current EV battery pack options. And it doesn't have the issue of long charging times. Honda started offering hydrogen cars in limited markets starting more than 20 years ago, and went through 3 generations of them in a dozen years, as the FCX and Clarity, with Toyota moving into the market about the same time Honda stepped out of it, with the Mira. Although the cost and infrastructure issues are even worse, with additional safety concerns, as well as other concerns, things unlikely to be resolved in the next decade. And for-profit companies will not tend to build advanced products at a financial loss, at least not long-term, and forcing them to do so raises prices and only increases the gap between the haves and the have-nots. So it's not surprising there is becoming a new push for hybrids, which are far more practical than full electrics, but still require a price premium, although they never really caught on outside of the Prius becoming some kind of hipster status symbol. In fact, it looked like they may disappear from the market when the electric car push started, but after 25 years of production, the pushback against full electrics has started to push the hybrid into the mainstream, in part because they appease at least some of the overzealous regulations. But it still has issues beyond price, primarily the batteries, which not only add cost and weight, but when they go bad, they turn the car into a sluggish, overweight gas hog in need of an expensive fix. Still better than a full electric, which essentially turns into a brick. And also we can get the same mileage as a 70-year-old Volkswagen Beetle, suggesting technology hasn't taken us as far as we'd like. Perhaps obvious, considering the complete lack of flying cars. Not that they haven't tried. Most have been little more than airplanes with folding wings so they can be driven on the street. Hardly the flying car of the future that we've all dreamed about. Somewhat closer are the more modern so-called manned drones, even if that is an oxymoron. But not really a new concept, traditionally called the VTOL, or vertical takeoff and landing, which doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. But experiments of the idea date back even before the flying Jeep of the late 1950s. And they're far from practical, at least until they can make one that is easily controlled and can land in a compact parking space.
Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads.
But perhaps we'll have fully electric ones by 2035. Or perhaps not. So as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment below and like and subscribe.